In the dense jungles of Guatemala, archaeologists made a discovery that would forever change our understanding of the Mayan civilization. Buried beneath the iconic temple of Tikal, they discovered something unexpected. Not gold, not jade, but the remains of master builders, their bones bearing the hallmarks of ritual sacrifice. These were no ordinary laborers. These were the brilliant minds who designed some of humanity's most magnificent structures. Tonight, we will explore a dark truth buried in stone for over 1,000 years. The Maya built architectural marvels that still defy explanation today. Pyramids that soared to the heavens, palaces that housed gods and kings, observation towers that tracked the celestial movements with incredible precision. But here's what the history books don't tell you. Being the mastermind behind these monuments was often a death sentence. Before we embark on this incredible adventure together, please tell me in the comments where you're listening to this story. Also, subscribe to support the channel. The Mayan civilization was more than magnificent temples and mysterious calendars. It was a society founded on blood, sacrifice, and the dangerous pursuit of architectural perfection. Tonight, you'll discover why the most talented builders in Mayan society lived in constant fear, why their greatest achievements became their tombs, and why modern archaeologists are only just beginning to understand the true cost of Mayan architectural mastery. This is the little-known story of the Maya's deadliest profession. Let me paint you a picture of what it was like to be a master architect in the great Maya city of Tikal. Around 600 CE, you've just been chosen by the divine king to design a new temple. This isn't just any building. This is a sacred mountain that will connect the earthly realm to the world of the gods. The honor is immense, but so is the danger that comes with it. Maya architecture wasn't just about creating functional spaces. Every building was a living representation of their cosmos. Temples represented mountains, the sacred dwelling places of deities. Palaces were earthly manifestations of divine power. And you, as the architect, weren't just designing structures. You were channeling the gods themselves through stone and mortar. But here's where the deadly reality begins to unfold. Recent archaeological discoveries have revealed something chilling about Maya building practices. When major construction projects were completed, they required consecration through blood sacrifice, and not just any blood would suffice. The gods demanded the ultimate offering, human life. Spanish chronicler Diego de Landa wrote about these rituals in the 16th century. But modern archaeology has revealed their true scope. At Chichen Itza, researchers discovered that the completion of major temples coincided with mass sacrificial events. Hundreds of victims were offered to consecrate these sacred spaces. But among these victims, a disturbing pattern has emerged. Skeletal analysis shows that many of the sacrificed individuals possessed specific physical characteristics. Enlarged finger joints from years of precise carving work, distinctive wear patterns on their bones from carrying heavy architectural tools. These weren't randomly chosen victims. These were master craftsmen, master architects. The Maya believed that the most valuable sacrifice was the one that cost them the most. What could be more valuable than the very minds that created their sacred spaces? Archaeological evidence from Cupan reveals dedicated burial chambers, specifically for architects and master builders. But these weren't honored graves. These were sacrificial deposits, placed at the foundations of the very buildings these men had designed. The practice had a twisted logic to it. By sacrificing the architect, The Maya ensured that the knowledge of the building's sacred proportions died with him. The temple became a unique creation, its secrets known only to the gods. No rival city could duplicate its power because the blueprint existed only in the realm of the dead. But it wasn't just completed buildings that demanded blood. The construction process itself was saturated with deadly rituals. At Palenque, archaeologists discovered evidence of what they call foundation sacrifices. Before any major construction could begin, architects had to oversee the ritual killing of captives whose blood would sanctify the ground. Imagine being responsible for not just the design of a temple, but also for determining who would die to make its construction possible. The psychological burden must have been enormous. You're creating beauty through bloodshed, designing monuments that require death to achieve their sacred purpose. The Maya had a complex understanding of architectural energetics. They believed that buildings possessed living souls, animated by the life force of those who died during their creation. The more prestigious the building, the more prestigious the sacrifice required. And as the master architect, you represented the pinnacle of craftsmanship. Your death wouldn't just consecrate the building, it would give it divine consciousness. Recent analysis of Maya hieroglyphic texts has revealed specific titles for architects who were marked for sacrifice. They were called house completers or mountain finishers. These weren't terms of honor. They were death sentences written in stone. At Yaxchilan, carved lintels show architects participating in their own sacrificial preparations. They're depicted dressed in ritual garments, their architectural tools transformed into ceremonial objects. One particularly haunting carving shows an architect offering his own blood while holding the plans for the very temple where his remains would later be discovered. The Spanish conquest brought an end to these practices, but not before they had claimed countless lives. Modern estimates suggest that over the course of Maya civilization, thousands of master builders paid the ultimate price for their architectural genius. But the ritual sacrifice of architects was just the beginning of their deadly profession. The construction process itself was fraught with dangers that would terrify any modern engineer. Picture this. You're standing at the base of what will become Temple for at Tikal, destined to rise 65 meters above the jungle canopy. Your task is to coordinate the construction of one of the tallest pre-Columbian structures in the Americas, using nothing but stone tools, human labor, and architectural techniques that pushed the boundaries of physics. The Maya built some of the most structurally ambitious buildings in the ancient world, but they did so without metal tools, without the wheel, and without draft animals. Every block of limestone had to be quarried by hand, shaped with stone implements, and transported through dense jungle terrain. The margin for error was virtually non-existent, and mistakes were often fatal. Let's start with the limestone itself. Maya architects worked primarily with a soft, chalky limestone that was easy to quarry when freshly exposed but hardened upon contact with air. This sounds convenient, but it created deadly working conditions. The limestone dust produced during cutting and shaping contained high levels of silica, causing a lung condition similar to what modern construction workers know as silica. Archaeological studies of Maya skeletal remains show clear evidence of respiratory diseases among builders and architects. Their lung tissue, preserved in some cases by the limestone dust itself, reveals extensive scarring and damage. Master architects, who spent decades inhaling this dust while supervising construction projects, often died slow, painful deaths as their lungs gradually hardened. But the respiratory dangers were just the beginning. The quarrying process itself was extraordinarily hazardous. Maya quarries at Palenque and Tikal show evidence of sudden collapses that buried workers alive. The soft limestone that made carving easier also made quarry walls unstable. Archaeological excavations have uncovered entire work crews entombed in limestone rubble, their tools still clutched in their skeletal hands. The transportation of massive stone blocks created another layer of mortal danger. Without wheels or draft animals, the Maya developed ingenious but perilous systems using wooden rollers, rope networks, and human leverage. Teams of workers would haul multi-ton blocks across jungle terrain using techniques that required perfect coordination. One misplaced step, one snapping rope, could crush multiple workers instantly. Archaeological evidence from Chichen reveals the remains of workers killed by falling stones during transport operations. Their bones show the distinctive crush injuries caused by limestone blocks weighing several tons. These weren't isolated accidents, but regular occurrences that made construction work one of the most dangerous occupations in Maya society. Now imagine being the architect responsible for directing these operations. Every day, you're making decisions that could mean life or death for the workers under your supervision. The positioning of scaffolding, the timing of lifts, the structural integrity of temporary supports. All of these fell under your authority. One miscalculation could result in catastrophic collapse and dozens of deaths. The Maya's signature architectural feature, the corbelled arch, presented unique engineering challenges. This technique involved gradually extending each layer of stones inward until they met at the top, creating self-supporting arches without the use of true keystones. It was an ingenious solution, but an incredibly dangerous one to construct. Building a corbelled arch required workers to climb increasingly precarious temporary structures while carrying heavy stones. The slightest miscalculation in weight distribution could cause the entire structure to collapse inward. Archaeological sites throughout the Maya world show evidence of partially completed corbelled arches that collapsed during construction, crushing the workers inside. As the architect, you had to understand not just the final structure, but every stage of the construction process. You needed to know exactly how much weight each layer could bear, how to distribute loads during construction, and when the structure would become self-supporting. This knowledge was gained through experience, often bitter experience that cost lives. The production of lime mortar added another deadly element to Maya construction. The process required burning limestone in massive kilns, heated to temperatures exceeding 900 degrees Celsius. These kilns, called caleras, were essentially controlled infernos that had to be maintained for days at a time. Workers faced constant danger from explosive temperature changes, toxic fumes, and accidental contact with molten lime. The chemical burns from quicklime were particularly severe, often resulting in permanent disability or death. As the architect overseeing these operations, you were responsible for managing these hellish production facilities, while maintaining the quality standards required for sacred buildings. Recent archaeological work at Mayan has uncovered evidence of a particularly gruesome accident at a lime production facility. The remains of 6 workers were found fused to the walls of a collapsed kiln, their bodies instantly calcified by temperatures hot enough to melt copper. Hieroglyphic inscriptions suggest this disaster occurred during the construction of a major temple complex. forcing the architect to redesign the entire project. The vertical nature of Maya construction created additional hazards. Workers regularly climbed heights that would challenge modern safety equipment, often while carrying heavy loads or working with sharp tools. Falls from Maya pyramids were common and almost always fatal. The stepped design that makes these structures so visually striking also made them particularly dangerous to navigate. During construction, archaeological evidence suggests that Maya architects developed some of the world's first safety protocols for high-altitude construction work. Bone implements that appear to be early forms of climbing gear have been found at construction sites, but these primitive safety measures offered little protection against the fundamental dangers of building massive stone structures by hand. The pressure to work quickly added another deadly dimension to Maya construction. Many building projects were tied to astronomical events or religious calendars that demanded completion by specific dates. Missing these deadlines wasn't just professionally embarrassing. It could be interpreted as a sign of divine disfavor, potentially resulting in the architect's execution. This time, pressure led to shortcuts and risks that modern safety standards would never permit. Workers were pushed to maintain dangerous work schedules, often laboring through the night by torchlight on precarious scaffolding. The combination of exhaustion, poor lighting, and inherently dangerous work created a perfect storm of fatal accidents. But perhaps the deadliest aspect of Maya construction wasn't the physical dangers. It was the social and political pressures that made the architect's position so precarious. In Maya society, architects occupied a unique and perilous position in the social hierarchy. They weren't quite royalty, but they weren't common laborers either. They were elevated craftsmen whose specialized knowledge made them invaluable to rulers, and potentially dangerous if that knowledge fell into the wrong hands. This precarious social position created a web of political dangers that could prove fatal at any moment. Let me tell you about the discovery that revealed just how deadly this position could be. In 1967, excavations at Palenque uncovered a mass grave containing the remains of 12 individuals. Initial analysis suggested these were victims of warfare, but closer examination revealed something far more sinister. These weren't random casualties. They were all master craftsmen, architects, sculptors, and engineers who had worked on the city's famous murals and architectural projects. Carbon dating revealed these men died at approximately the same time, around 792 CE, just as Palenque was reaching its architectural zenith. They hadn't died in battle. They had been systematically eliminated, likely by their own rulers. But why would a king destroy his most valuable architects? The answer lies in the deadly politics of Maya city-states. These weren't unified empires, but competing kingdoms in constant conflict with one another. An architect who knew the structural secrets of one city's defenses could potentially betray those secrets to enemies. More importantly, an architect who understood the sacred proportions of royal temples could theoretically recreate that divine power for rival rulers. Maya kings solved this security problem in the most permanent way possible. Once a major architectural project was completed, the master architects were often quietly eliminated. Their knowledge died with them, ensuring that their creations remained unique and that their secrets couldn't be stolen by competing cities. Recent analysis of Maya hieroglyphic records has uncovered numerous references to what scholars now call completion ceremonies. These weren't celebrations, they were execution rituals. The completion of a major temple or palace was marked by the ritual sacrifice of the architects and master builders who had created it. The Bonampak mass grave shows clear evidence of ritual execution. The architects were killed using obsidian blades, their hearts removed in the traditional Maya sacrificial manner. But unlike typical war captives, these men were buried with their architectural tools, suggesting their profession was central to their sacrifice. This practice created a deadly paradox for Maya architects. The more skilled and successful you became, the more likely you were to be marked for death. Excellence in your profession was literally a death sentence. Archaeological evidence from multiple sites suggests that the average lifespan of a master architect was significantly shorter than other craftsmen, not due to workplace accidents, but due to ritual execution. The political pressures didn't end with completion ceremonies. During the construction process itself, architects faced constant scrutiny from royal officials and priests. Any deviation from approved plans, any structural failure, any delay in construction could be interpreted as incompetence or even treason. At Palenque, hieroglyphic inscriptions record the execution of an architect named Kainich Wayub, his crime, a minor structural flaw in a temple wall that was discovered during construction. Rather than allowing repairs, King Pakal ordered the architect's immediate sacrifice. The flawed wall was rebuilt using stones stained with the architect's blood, supposedly to imbue the structure with greater spiritual power. The competitive nature of Maya architecture added another layer of deadly pressure. Master architects weren't just competing for commissions, they were competing for survival. Kings often commissioned multiple architects to design competing proposals for major projects, with the understanding that only the winning design would be built and only the losing architects would survive. This system created an environment of professional paranoia and sabotage. Architects would actively undermine their competitors' projects, sometimes through methods that proved fatal. Archaeological evidence from Calakmul suggests that competing architects occasionally sabotaged each other's structural calculations, leading to deadly construction failures designed to eliminate rivals. The apprenticeship system that trained new architects was itself fraught with danger. Master architects had strong incentives to limit the number of people who learned their secrets. Too many qualified architects meant increased competition and reduced individual value to rulers. Some masters resolved this problem by arranging fatal accidents for their most promising students. At Yaxchilan, archaeologists discovered the remains of what appears to have been an architectural school buried beneath a collapsed building. The structure failure was initially attributed to faulty construction, but closer analysis revealed evidence of deliberate structural sabotage. It appears that a master architect deliberately weakened the building's foundations to eliminate a group of advanced students who threatened his monopoly on certain specialized knowledge. The Maya belief system added another deadly dimension to architectural competition. Buildings weren't just structures, they were living entities imbued with spiritual power. An architect whose buildings failed or collapsed wasn't just professionally incompetent, they were spiritually corrupted, marked by the gods for destruction. This spiritual dimension meant that structural failures had consequences far beyond professional embarrassment. When the partially completed Temple of the Seven Dolls at Gibraltar collapsed during construction around 700 CE, the king ordered not only the execution of the responsible architect, but also his entire family lineage. The Maya believed that spiritual corruption could be inherited, making the architects' children and grandchildren equally dangerous. The documentation of these deaths provides a chilling insight into Maya attitudes toward architectural failure. Hieroglyphic records describe these executions in detail, often emphasizing the spiritual pollution that made them necessary. Architects weren't just being punished for incompetence. They were being purified through death to prevent their corruption from spreading to other projects. The social isolation experienced by master architects made their position even more precarious. Their specialized knowledge set them apart from ordinary craftsmen, but their common birth prevented full acceptance by the nobility. They existed in a social limbo that left them vulnerable to accusations and persecution from multiple directions. Common workers might resent an architect's elevated status and actively work to undermine their projects. Noble patrons might view architects as useful but ultimately expendable servants whose loyalty could never be fully trusted. This isolation meant that when political winds shifted or when projects failed, architects had few allies to protect them from fatal consequences. But perhaps the deadliest aspect of the architect's profession wasn't the political dangers or even the ritual sacrifices. It was the technical knowledge itself, knowledge that required working with materials and processes that could prove lethal in ways the Maya never fully understood. The technical mastery that made Maya architects legendary also exposed them to hidden dangers that modern science is only beginning to understand. The very knowledge that elevated them above common craftsmen was slowly killing them in ways they never realized. Let me take you inside the secret world of Maya engineering, where architectural genius came at a price measured in human lives. The production of lime plaster, fundamental to Maya construction, required architects to oversee processes that were essentially industrial-scale chemistry experiments using medieval technology. The Maya discovered that by burning limestone at extremely high temperatures, they could create quicklime, a material that, when mixed with water, formed an incredibly strong and durable mortar. But this discovery came with deadly consequences that the Maya couldn't have anticipated. Recent analysis of Maya lime kilns has revealed they regularly reached temperatures exceeding 1,000 degrees Celsius, hot enough to melt copper. Maintaining these temperatures required master architects to work directly with furnaces that generated not only intense heat, but also toxic chemical fumes. The limestone burning process releases significant quantities of carbon dioxide, carbon monoxide, and sulfur compounds. In the enclosed spaces where Maya lime kilns operated, these gases could reach lethal concentrations. Architects supervising lime production were essentially working in poorly ventilated chemical plants, using technology they didn't fully understand. Archaeological analysis of skeletal remains from known architects shows distinctive patterns of chemical poisoning. High levels of lead, mercury, and sulfur compounds in bone tissue suggest chronic exposure to industrial toxins. Many Maya architects suffered from what we would now recognize as heavy metal poisoning, experiencing symptoms ranging from neurological disorders to organ failure. The Maya's signature architectural achievement, the corbelled vault, required mathematical calculations that pushed their understanding of engineering to its absolute limits. Creating these self-supporting arches demanded precise understanding of load distribution, structural mechanics, and material properties. But the margin for error was virtually non-existent. Master architects had to perform these calculations using mathematical systems based on base 20, counting, and astronomical observations. They had no safety factors built into their designs, no computer modeling to verify their assumptions, and no engineering handbooks to consult. Everything depended on the individual architect's ability to visualize complex three-dimensional forces in their head. The psychological pressure of this responsibility was enormous. A single miscalculation could result in catastrophic structural failure, killing workers and destroying months or years of labor. Recent analysis of Maya mathematical texts suggests that architects developed increasingly complex ritual practices to verify their calculations, essentially using religious ceremonies to double-check their engineering work. But even when their calculations were correct, the construction techniques themselves were extraordinarily dangerous. Building a corbelled vault required workers to construct the arch from both sides simultaneously, meeting in the middle. If the two sides didn't align perfectly, the entire structure would collapse. As the supervising architect, you had to coordinate this process with millimeter precision, using only visual observation and hand signals. Archaeological evidence from Tikal shows the remains of a corbelled arch construction that went catastrophically wrong. Around 650 CE, the two sides of the arch were misaligned by less than 10 centimeters, but this tiny error caused the entire structure to pancake downward, crushing 12 workers instantly. Hieroglyphic inscriptions record that the responsible architect was immediately executed for this failure. The Mayas' advanced understanding of astronomy created additional technical challenges for their architects. Many buildings had to be precisely aligned with celestial events, solstices, equinoxes, Venus cycles, and lunar movements. These astronomical requirements often conflicted with basic structural engineering principles, forcing architects to create buildings that satisfied both scientific and engineering demands. At Chichen Itza, the famous El Castillo Pyramid demonstrates this deadly intersection of astronomy and architecture. The building's design creates a shadow serpent that appears to crawl down the staircase during the spring and autumn equinoxes. But achieving this effect required the architect to make structural compromises that weakened the building's foundation. Recent engineering analysis suggests that El Castillo's astronomical features created stress concentrations that should have caused structural failure within decades of construction. The fact that the building survived suggests that its architect possessed engineering knowledge that we're still trying to understand, knowledge that was never written down and died with its creator. The Mayas' use of massive stone blocks created engineering challenges that would be difficult even with modern equipment. Some Maya buildings incorporate limestone blocks weighing over 10 tons, quarried from sites kilometers away and lifted to heights of 60 meters or more. The engineering required to accomplish these feats pushed Maya technology to its absolute limits. Archaeological investigations have revealed that Maya architects developed sophisticated mechanical systems for moving and positioning these massive stones. Evidence of pulley systems, lever mechanisms, and inclined planes has been found at construction sites throughout the Maya world. But these systems required precise coordination and split-second timing. A single mechanical failure could result in massive stones falling onto workers below. The mental strain of coordinating these complex engineering projects took its own toll on Maya architects. Hieroglyphic texts describe architects suffering from what we would now recognize as severe anxiety disorders, depression, and nervous breakdowns. The constant pressure of being responsible for projects that could fail catastrophically at any moment created psychological casualties as well as physical ones. Recent analysis of Maya artistic depictions shows architects increasingly portrayed with symbols associated with mental illness and spiritual disturbance. By the late Classic period, master architects were often depicted with distinctive facial markings that Maya scholars interpret as indicators of psychological trauma or supernatural possession. The specialization required from Maya architecture created another deadly problem: the concentration of critical knowledge in individual minds. Unlike modern construction projects, where plans are documented and distributed among multiple professionals, Maya architectural knowledge existed primarily in the memories of master architects. This meant that the death of a single individual could result in the loss of decades of accumulated engineering knowledge. Archaeological evidence suggests that some construction projects were abandoned mid-completion when their supervising architects died unexpectedly, leaving no one with sufficient knowledge to continue the work safely. The competitive secrecy among Maya architects made this knowledge loss even more severe. Masters actively concealed their techniques from rivals and sometimes even from their own apprentices. This secrecy was partly driven by professional competition, but also by genuine safety concerns. Incomplete knowledge of Maya engineering techniques could prove fatally dangerous. But beyond all the technical challenges, beyond the toxic exposures and engineering disasters, the spiritual beliefs that made their buildings not just structures, but living entities that demanded increasingly terrible sacrifices. In Maya cosmology, buildings weren't just inanimate structures made of stone and mortar. They were living entities with their own spiritual consciousness, their own needs, and their own hunger for human blood. This belief transformed Maya architects from mere builders into high priests of stone, responsible not just for construction, but for feeding the supernatural appetites of their creations. Recent archaeological discoveries have revealed the full extent of this deadly spiritual responsibility, uncovering evidence that will change how we understand Maya architecture forever. At the ancient city of Tikal in Belize, archaeologists made a discovery that sent shockwaves through the academic world. These were feeding chambers, designed to provide ongoing nourishment to the temple's living spirit. The skeletal analysis revealed a chilling pattern. The remains showed clear evidence of systematic sacrifice spanning over 400 years. But most disturbing of all, many of the victims showed the distinctive bone markings of architects and master craftsmen. These men hadn't been sacrificed once during construction. They had been repeatedly bled and mutilated over extended periods, kept alive to provide ongoing spiritual nourishment to the temple they had created. Maya architects believed that buildings developed increasingly sophisticated spiritual needs as they aged, but mature temples, especially those that had witnessed decades of religious ceremonies, developed what the Maya called deep hunger, a spiritual craving that could only be satisfied through elaborate sacrifice rituals. As the original architect of such a building, you held special responsibility for satisfying these supernatural appetites. You were forever linked to your creation, forever responsible for its spiritual well-being. This responsibility manifested in increasingly deadly ways as buildings aged, where architects were required to provide their own blood to nourish temples they had designed decades earlier. These weren't small, symbolic offerings, but substantial bloodletting rituals that left participants weak and sometimes fatally injured. The aging process of Maya buildings created another layer of supernatural danger. As structures weathered and developed cracks, the Maya interpreted these physical changes as evidence of spiritual illness in the building itself. The original architect became responsible for healing these spiritual ailments through increasingly elaborate and dangerous rituals. At Capan, archaeologists discovered evidence of what appears to have been an architect's death during one such healing ritual. The remains of a master builder were found sealed within the walls of a temple he had originally designed 30 years earlier. Hieroglyphic inscriptions suggest he was entombed alive as part of a desperate attempt to cure the building's spiritual sickness. When structural cracks appeared in its foundation, the Maya believed that certain architectural features could develop independent spiritual consciousness. Doorways could become hungry mouths demanding sacrifice. Stairways could become supernatural pathways requiring blood toll for passage. Windows could become the eyes of gods, watching and judging all who entered the building. As the architect responsible for these features, you were expected to understand their individual spiritual needs and provide appropriate offerings. Archaeological evidence suggests that some architects spent more time managing the spiritual requirements of their existing buildings than designing new ones. The profession gradually transformed from creative design work into a form of architectural shamanism focused on appeasing supernatural building spirits. The most dangerous spiritual aspect of Maya architecture was the belief in architectural possession. The Maya thought that powerful spirits could inhabit buildings, using the structures as physical bodies in the mortal world. When this happened, the building's original architect became spiritually linked to the possessing entity, essentially becoming its high priest and primary servant. Recent analysis of Maya ritual texts describes the symptoms of architectural possession in disturbing detail. Architects linked to possessed buildings were said to experience prophetic visions, supernatural strength, and the ability to communicate directly with gods. But they also suffered from what we would now recognize as severe mental illness, including hallucinations, violent behavior, and complete detachment from reality. The Spanish chronicler Diego de Landa recorded witnessing the execution of an architect who had allegedly been possessed by the spirit of a temple at Chichen Itza. According to Landa's account, the man had become convinced that he was the physical incarnation of the feathered serpent god Kukulkan, and had begun demanding human sacrifices to feed what he claimed was his divine hunger. Archaeological investigation of this case has revealed physical evidence supporting Landa's account. Beneath the temple of Kukulkan at Chichen Itza, excavations have uncovered a chamber containing the remains of 47 individuals, all showing evidence of ritual execution. Hieroglyphic inscriptions in the chamber identify many of these victims as offerings provided by the temple's original architect during a period of alleged spiritual possession. The belief in living buildings also created deadly competition among architectural spirits. The Maya thought that temples and palaces could become jealous of each other, engaging in supernatural warfare that required their architects to provide ever more elaborate offerings to maintain spiritual superiority. This competition manifested in what scholars now call architectural arms races, escalating cycles of ritual sacrifice designed to spiritually empower buildings against their supernatural rivals. Architects found themselves trapped in these cycles, forced to provide increasingly valuable sacrifices or risk their buildings being spiritually defeated by competitors. At Tikal, evidence suggests that the architects of Temple I and Temple II became locked in such a spiritual competition around 720 CE. Hieroglyphic records describe a series of escalating sacrifice rituals as each architect attempted to provide his temple with superior spiritual power. The competition culminated when the architect of Temple I offered his own children as sacrifices, apparently believing that no greater offering was possible. The Mayas' understanding of architectural death added another terrifying dimension to the architect's spiritual responsibilities. They believed that buildings could die spiritually even while remaining physically intact. When this happened, the structure became what they called a dead shell, a dangerous supernatural vacuum that could attract malevolent spirits or become a gateway to the underworld. Preventing architectural death required constant spiritual maintenance from the original architect. This involved regular bloodletting rituals, the provision of human sacrifices, and increasingly elaborate ceremonies designed to maintain the building's spiritual vitality. The older an architect became, the more buildings he was responsible for maintaining, creating an ever-increasing burden of spiritual obligation. Archaeological evidence suggests that some elderly architects were literally bled to death in their attempts to maintain the spiritual health of multiple buildings. Skeletal remains show evidence of repeated, systematic bloodletting over extended periods, often resulting in fatal anemia or infection. The final stage of an architect's spiritual responsibility was the most deadly of all, the requirement to join their creation in death when their own mortal life ended. The Maya believed that when an architect died, their buildings would begin to spiritually decay unless their creator's spirit remained present to maintain them. This belief led to the practice of architectural entombment, the ritual burial of architects within the structures they had designed. But these weren't peaceful interments. Archaeological evidence suggests that architects were often buried alive, sealed within chambers in their own buildings while still conscious, supposedly to ensure their spirits would remain present to maintain the structure's supernatural vitality. But even death didn't end an architect's deadly responsibilities. Recent DNA analysis has revealed evidence that suggests the Maya belief system included provisions for posthumous architectural service that extended the danger beyond the grave itself. In June 2024, researchers published findings that revolutionized our understanding of Maya architectural practices and revealed a genetic legacy of death that persisted for generations. What they discovered in the DNA of sacrificed children at Chichen Itza tells a story more chilling than any archaeological evidence we've uncovered so far. The study analyzed genetic material from 64 children found in a ritual chamber near Chichen Itza's sacred cenote. What they found wasn't random victims of circumstance. These children bore the genetic markers of master craftsmen and architects, passed down through bloodlines that had been systematically targeted for sacrifice across multiple generations. All 64 victims were male, and genetic analysis revealed that many were twins or close relatives. But here's what made this discovery truly shocking. Isotope analysis of their teeth showed they had been raised specifically for sacrifice, fed special diets, and trained in architectural and engineering skills before their ritual deaths between ages 3 and 6. The Maya weren't just sacrificing architects at the completion of projects. They were breeding future architects for the specific purpose of sacrificial offering. creating hereditary lineages of master builders whose children were destined for ritual death from the moment of their birth. This practice connects directly to the Maya creation myth of the hero twins, legendary figures who underwent cycles of death and rebirth to outwit the gods of the underworld. The genetic evidence suggests that Maya society identified certain architectural families as living embodiments of this myth, subjecting them to ritualized cycles of creation and sacrifice that could span centuries. The implications are staggering. Maya architectural knowledge wasn't just professionally dangerous, it was genetically cursed. Being born into an architectural family meant inheriting not just technical skills, but also a hereditary death sentence that could claim your children and grandchildren for generations. DNA analysis has revealed that this practice wasn't limited to Chichen Itza. Similar genetic patterns have been identified at sacrifice sites throughout the Maya world, suggesting that the systematic targeting of architectural bloodlines was a widespread cultural practice that persisted for over 600 years. The genetic data tells us something else that's equally disturbing. Many of the sacrificed children showed signs of deliberate genetic selection. They weren't just the offspring of architects. They were the most talented offspring, chosen for sacrifice specifically because their genetic inheritance suggested they would become master builders themselves. This selective culling had a devastating impact on Maya architectural innovation. By systematically eliminating the most gifted individuals from each generation of builders, Maya society was essentially breeding out its own architectural genius. The genetic bottleneck created by centuries of sacrifice may help explain why Maya architectural achievement peaked during the Classic period and then gradually declined. Recent analysis of modern Maya populations has revealed the long-term genetic consequences of these practices. Certain gene variants associated with spatial intelligence and mathematical ability, traits that would have been advantageous for architects, show unusually low frequency in contemporary Maya communities. The genocidal targeting of architectural bloodlines left permanent scars in the genetic landscape of Maya civilization. But the genetic evidence reveals something even more sinister about Maya architectural practices. The systematic nature of these sacrifices suggests they weren't spontaneous religious rituals, but carefully planned population control measures designed to maintain architectural knowledge within narrow, controllable bloodlines. By limiting the number of potential architects through selective sacrifice, Maya rulers could ensure that architectural secrets remained concentrated in a small number of families who could be easily monitored and controlled. The genetic targeting wasn't just religiously motivated, it was politically calculated to maintain elite control over architectural knowledge. The Spanish conquest interrupted these practices, but their genetic legacy persisted in unexpected ways. Colonial records describe the children and grandchildren of Maya architects as being particularly susceptible to European diseases, suggesting that centuries of selective breeding for architectural talent may have inadvertently weakened their immune systems. Modern genetic analysis has confirmed this hypothesis. The same gene variants associated with enhanced spatial intelligence in Maya architectural families also correlate with increased vulnerability to smallpox and other infectious diseases. The genetic modifications created by centuries of selective breeding and sacrifice made Maya architectural bloodlines particularly vulnerable to biological warfare by European colonizers. This genetic vulnerability had catastrophic consequences during the colonial period. Archaeological evidence suggests that Maya architectural families suffered disproportionately high mortality rates during disease outbreaks, effectively completing the genocidal process that had begun with ritual sacrifice centuries earlier. The genetic legacy of Maya architectural practices extends to the present day in ways that researchers are only beginning to understand.